Welcome to the Figure Fit Lifestyle Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Nierzwicki, international best-selling author of the book Happy, Healthy, Fit, founder and owner of Solace Yoga Studio, Solace Yoga School, and Figure Fit, the worldwide online personal training program. I'm a single mom, Paleo Fit Score female champion for 2014. I am a self and soul love expert, an entrepreneur at heart, a visionary and a futurist. I'm also a mentor. I am so grateful that you are here. Each week, I'll bring you a special guest or an inspirational tip that will help you break old patterns, find that inner motivation that will help you take action towards creating the life of your dreams. You didn't come here to play small and watch others live amazing lives. No, you are divine, my godly friend. The universe wants to shower you with an amazing life filled with happiness and soulful connections. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Figure Fit Podcast, where we discuss fitness, paleo nutrition, yoga, meditation, spirituality, and other ways to have a happy, peaceful, and abundant life. And here's your host, Liz Nierzwicki.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the show. I'm so excited for today's guest. You guys, I have Robb Wolf. He is the New York Times best-selling author of the Paleo Solution, the original human diet. Robb is a former research biochemist and one of the world's leading experts in the Paleolithic nutrition community. Robb has transformed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people all across the world with his top-ranked iTunes podcast and his wildly popular seminar series. Robb has functioned as a review editor for the Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism and the Journal of Evolutionary Health. Robb is a former California State Powerlifting Champion and a 6-0 amateur kickboxer. Wolf has provided seminars in nutrition and strength and conditioning to various governmental and military entities, including NASA, the United States Navy SEALs, Naval Special Warfare, the United States Marine Corps, and the Canadian Light Infantry. Robb also co-founded the first and fourth CrossFit affiliate gyms in the world. And let me circle back. I did say that he is a powerlifting champion. I got to give you guys these numbers for sure. 565-pound squat, 345-pound bench, and 565-pound deadlift. Okay. Not to just pump anybody's ego up out there, because I know that that's not what we're here to do. But you guys, that's impressive. And you know me, I love working out. I love bringing out my inner warrior. And that's certainly what he's done in his life as well. So you guys, without further ado, let's bring Robb on the show. Well, Robb, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm super excited that you're here, and I'm excited to share you with my community. I had Mark Sisson on the podcast last week, and I call him the godfather of primal living. And today I was thinking about you, and I was taking my son to school, and I'm like, okay, so he was the godfather, and I'm interviewing the king today.
Well, however the nomenclature works out, Mark is both smarter and much better looking than I am. So your listeners are getting a downgrade this week compared to your Mark Sisson show, but I'll do my best to fill the void there.
Oh, you have so much to offer the world. So
Thank you.
We're going to just get started. And, I'm really excited to talk with you a little bit about, what you've been up to since releasing the Paleo Solution in 2010. And then also, but before we go into that, can you give us my listeners, a quick snippet for those who have not read the Paleo Solution, a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I was depending on how far back we go, I've always been very interested in health and human performance. My parents were pretty unhealthy. Both of them smoked. My dad drank. Both of them developed type 2 diabetes in their mid to late 30s. So I had a pretty good suspicion that things could, go better if we had better diet and lifestyle practices. And so I've played around with a lot of different approaches. And I did a biochemistry undergrad, was looking at either med school or a research track. And right around this time, I developed some really serious health problems. This was around 1998. And I had ulcerative colitis so bad that I was down to 130 pounds. And I was a former California State Powerlifting Champion, so I usually walk around about 175, 180 pounds, pretty lean, reasonably muscular, and due to malabsorption issues, I got down to about 130 pounds. And so I was pretty rough, and this idea of a paleo or ancestral health type diet got on my radar. I started fiddling with that and immediately just had this profound change in my health. And what it did is it made me really not want to go through the mainstream medical process. Like, I just couldn't wrap my head around spending 8 years learning, about pathology just to then turn back around and say, hey, we need to sleep, move, eat, commune better. And that was kind of a type of, quote, medicine I wanted to practice. And it was right around this time that this newfangled workout called CrossFit was discovered online. And this was around 2000, 2001. And my friend Dave Warner and I actually ended up co-founding what was to be the first CrossFit affiliate in the world. And then I moved back down to Chico, California, and opened the fourth CrossFit affiliate in the world and worked with those guys for a number of years. And I just had a huge opportunity to work with a ton of people, both in our gym and traveling around the world providing nutrition seminars. And that Paleo Solution book was really kind of an outgrowth of my work in the gym and also, traveling and presenting in front of tens of thousands of people and getting all the questions and the feedback and figuring out, what people needed to understand, what I wasn't clear about in the message. And that's where the Paleo Solution came from.
Wow. I was thinking about this quote about something about, like, I posted it on Facebook the other day. It was something, I'm going to paraphrase, but it's about that you don't find yourself, in an easy life. You find yourself in the fire. And so would you agree with that statement? Because your life is pretty much spawned from going through that period with your parents, and then also ulcerative, I can never say that word, ulcerative colitis.
Yeah.
And then, just being so ill that you were like, no, this is not my fate. And you just found your way out. I always call that the warrior's walk.
Right. And it was very profound for me. And it also, I think I'm just kind of wired up this way a little bit. Like, I'm the knucklehead that if I see some cars that just had an accident on the road, I like pull over and get my first aid kit and go see if I can help people. Like, I'm just kind of that person, which is both good and bad. But when I had this, I guess, insight into this kind of ancestral health approach to doing things, which seemed to be really, there's lots of ways to get skinny and lots of ways to look good in your favorite pair of jeans and stuff like that. But I, and in particular, my mother had really severe GI problems and some autoimmune related issues, which there were no good solutions to that up until relatively recently. And in digging around this kind of paleo diet concept, I will pat myself on the back. Like, I think I am the person that put together originally the autoimmune paleo protocol and started promulgating that. And we've been able to help a lot of people with things like multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, and a host of other autoimmune related diseases. And what happened with me is, I have that kind of Boy Scout tendency of, if I see someone who needs help, I want to help them. And when you have this knowledge of how sleep and food and exercise and community influence people, then just about every single person you meet, you're like, oh man, I could probably help you. I could help you. I could help you. And it becomes both kind of a really cool mission and also a little bit of a burden that you have to navigate too, because you don't want every feature of your life to kind of boil down to this stuff. But at the same time, when you see people who are legitimately struggling and you have a few nuggets of knowledge that might make a pretty profound impact on these people or their kids or their extended family, you're kind of obligated to say or do something, and so it's been really interesting trying to figure out how to navigate all that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that one. It's, I just want to acknowledge you first and foremost, because I didn't know that's where a lot of the autoimmune healing came from. I got into the paleo world back in 2012 from my good friend who lives in California, and I was having digestive issues, and she said, you might want to just check out the paleo diet. And she was doing it at the time. And so I pretty much started off with a 21-day sugar detox. And then I started to go paleo after that. And my digestive issues, my allergies, everything started to clear and heal.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I was like, oh, this is it. For the first time in my life, I can actually go to the bathroom regularly,
right,
and not have a problem. And, so that's been my route, not looking back ever. And of course, like any normal human being, I see Doritos and want them. I'll still want things that aren't the best for me. And I actually went through a period of time where I realized that was just old habitual, like lifestyle programming from childhood, just easy things that we would buy at the store, habits run deep. And so that was something that I pretty much went through and started training my community is, let's look at your habits. Let's look at your parents and what are the things that they bought, because it was almost an expression of love, like this bonding around this kind of food. And in my neck of the woods, we get together and we have barbecues or we have cookouts, and it's always based on the food. And most of the time it's the standard American diet foods. And that was everybody's expression of what can I bring? And it's still like that. But for me, I've tried to steer my family in a different direction and say, hey, if we're going to do this, make sure it's a full, legit, real food meal.
Right.
And, one of the things that I wanted to ask you before I get into what you're doing now is when you first started this journey, how hard was it for you when you were talking with your parents and really trying to show them that there's a different way? What kind of pushback did you get? And then how did you deal with that?
Oh, man, that's a really good question. So, for my personal transformation, I was so sick and so desperate that when I changed my diet around to this kind of paleo way of eating, the healing transformation was just immediate and powerful. And I still fiddle with elements. Like my digestion is way better than what it used to be, but I still have some slightly funky elements to it that I continue to tinker with and try to refine. And, with my parents, interestingly, it was my mom's health issues that got all of the focus that I needed to kind of ask the right questions to arrive at this paleo diet concept. She had been diagnosed with celiac disease, and it was the opinion of her rheumatologist that the celiac disease, which is an autoimmune response to gluten or wheat, rye, oats, barley, millet, those things, that this was likely a contributor, if not the causative factor, in her rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's and these other interrelated autoimmune conditions. So on the one hand, I had some decent buy-in from my mom on this gluten-free story, because if she had a gluten exposure, it was incredibly uncomfortable to her, like really bad GI problems, neurological symptoms and whatnot. But I could never get her to eat a whole food, largely unrefined diet such that we could get a handle on her type 2 diabetes. It was incredibly frustrating. And my dad was maybe even more frustrating. His diabetes was a bit more aggressive, and he ended up having a toe amputated, and then part of his foot, and then the whole foot, and then below the knee amputation eventually. And each stage along this process, my dad would, and I was doing wound care on him at the time. So like I had a pretty intimate, interaction with what the type 2 diabetic process is and how horrible it is. But my dad would sit there and he would say, well, Rob, I guess I'm going to let him take the foot. And it was almost like this, he was doing a deal with the universe. It's like, well, you take my foot and then everything will be okay. And I'd say to him, Dad, that's not going to fix anything. Like, this is a stopgap measure. The next time it may be the other foot, or it may be that you're blind, or it may be this, or it may be that. And, for both of my parents, there was just this, maybe it was a product of their generation that they really just had this faith in the medical establishment that they were going to do what they needed to do to kind of fix things. And, why would I fix my diet to do this stuff? This is just what, getting diabetes or cardiovascular disease, that just happens. And we need medicine to fix that. And it was really frustrating. And I had a bit of an estranged relationship with both parents until I I reached a point where I was like, do I want a relationship with them at all, or do I want to try to be right about this nutrition stuff? And so I finally kind of relaxed into that. But the process of, particularly my mom in this case, like when she would bring up excuses and she would kind of chuck and jive trying to get out of talking about this stuff, it really refined. Like I became like a hound dog. Like when I talk to clients now, I know immediately if we're going to start getting some sort of weird, and it's not weird, but like, this emotional pushback, like I know within split seconds, I'm like, oh, I'm totally on to you. I know exactly where you're going, and so it really brought my, I guess my coaching aptitude up to a super high refined level, because I just got exposed to it all the time and was really concerned and passionate about it.
Wow. So that kind of, I could have another podcast just about this because I'm with you there. I can do the same when you start talking to people about nutrition. It's almost like their eyes glass over. They're so bought into this medicine system that there's just this easy, quick fix pill, and this pill is going to fix everything. And there's this delusion that they're so brainwashed into. And like you said, you don't know if it's really a product of, the environment that they were raised in. I know that it's changing, but that your coaching, my coaching, what we do, we kind of are on this bridge, and we see people on one side that are really on board with what we do as holistic healers and starting there. And then also on the other side, looking at people who really are kind of like a deer in headlights and just believing that, or not believing that nutrition really has anything to do with it.
Right.
So, what did you do after that? Like, how did you begin to refine your coaching when you would come across that with people?
Man, this was kind of a hard thing, and it was a hard one, I guess, lesson or battle or however you want to couch that. But I became pretty aware of this reality that if I had 100 people come through the door and I started working with them, about 50% of those people, I would say, so what are your goals? What do you want to do? I want to lose weight. I want to get some pull-ups. I want to look better, whatever it was. It's like, okay, we can motor towards that. Here's what I recommend. We do for 30 days this kind of paleo type diet deal. This is what it looks like. This is what you need to do. Here's all the resources. In this 50 people, cohort, they would generally say, okay, roger that. They jumped in, they started doing it. There was no drama. The other 50 people, about half of those folks, required begging and pleading and pushback, and they would pull up every article that they could find to the counter of this whole thing. And it was like Groundhog's Day. It's like you just went through this again and again and again. But eventually you would, I'd say wear these people down, or, what I would finally get to the point with these folks, I would say, listen, I've got a 200 person waiting list. You're the next person in queue. You're either on board or you're out. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And they'd be, then at that point, they're kind of like, oh, okay. And then they would get with it. And that group of people, that 25 people, they became the most over-the-top zealots that you could imagine. Like, they were annoying. You had to water these people down and be like, yeah, man, this ancestral health stuff is good, but you don't want to be the crazy person, to just mellow it out a little bit, because they would have this really, as much as they pushed back against it, then it was that same degree of energy when they flipped that was added to like the zealotry. So they became the crazy person.
Yes.
And then there was about 20 to 25 people that it didn't matter how sick they were, what their life circumstance was, their needs were infinite, and I just couldn't fill them. And those were the folks that I would eventually say, your needs exceed my capabilities. I recommend you work with someone else. And it just seemed to kind of play out along those lines with, a little bit of cajoling and arm bending and teasing and whatnot. I could probably get about 75 people out of 100 to at least give this stuff a shot. And my crazy, greasy, nefarious used car salesman pitch is, try it for 30 days, see how you look, feel, and perform. Maybe take some photos and some blood work before, take some photos and some blood work afterwards, and then you make the decision, are the results worth the effort? I mean, when I say greasy used car salesman, I'm being about as facetious as I can. Like, I feel like this is as honest and transparent a process as you could possibly get. It's here's the guideline, here's the yellow brick road, follow it, and then you tell me if it's worthwhile doing that. And so I feel like it's a very honest, transparent process again. But there was some cross-section of these folks that I just couldn't I just couldn't reach. And it became a question of, do I help the folks that are already interested in being helped, or do I devote exponentially increasing amounts of time and energy trying to get 1 or 2 more percentage points in this group of people that for whatever reason they just didn't want to change. They were my mom or dad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So are you still working with clients one-on-one?
Very little, although I'm on the board of directors of a medical clinic here in Reno, and I do some consulting, basically kind of like when they do a review of some of the more problematic cases, particularly if it starts getting into like some autoimmunity or lipidology related stuff, then I will jump in on some of that. And so that's where I still have a little bit of a finger on the clinical side of things, but I'm not working with people directly really all that much.
Yeah. So let's catch people up with, you released the Paleo Solution in 2010. It's now 2017. What have you been doing since then?
Almost 6 years ago, we moved to Reno, Nevada, and we just thought this was going to be a holdover spot to have our first kid, and then we were going to go find the real place that we would be after that. And we were here maybe 3 weeks, and I got a phone call from a guy who identified himself as Greenie, which was kind of odd, but that's how he described himself. And he said that he was part of a medical clinic here, which is the clinic I'm now on the board of directors of. And he asked me to come down and check out what they were doing. And when I walked into the clinic, it was kind of like an alternate reality going on. They had my books in there for sale, and Gary Taubes and Mark Sisson's, and usually the mainstream medical outlets, like, they gather up these paleo ancestral health books and burn them. Like it's sacrilege to have this stuff around. But this clinic was totally geeked out on this topic, and they had just wrapped up a 2-year pilot study with the Reno Police, Reno Fire Department. They found 35 people that were at high risk for type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. We got these folks on a lower carb paleo type diet, modified their sleep and exercise as best we could. And based off the changes in their blood work and their health risk assessment parameters, it's estimated that the pilot study alone saved the city of Reno about $22 million with a 33-to-1 return on investment. And so it was really powerful, and it was very well done, very well controlled and analyzed. And so what it did, it just really was a huge validator for me that I'm like, okay, there really is something to this ancestral health paleo diet kind of approach, And so I've worked the last several years trying to figure out a way to take this process and scale it up and take it out to the masses. And I have to be honest, I'm chagrined in how much harder and more challenging it has been to pull this off. All the incentives, whether we're talking about the modern junk food industry or social media and the old guard media, the medical establishment, like every incentive and political alignment is set up to make eating better and living better hard. Like it's just the deck is kind of stacked against us. And so I thought that 5 years down the road, we would have a multi-billion-dollar company and we would be changing medicine the world round. And it's grown, but it hasn't grown quite as fast as what I thought. So I've just been hammer and tongs working on this stuff. And again, same story, grabbing the folks who want help and working with them.
Wow. That is incredible. I actually, in my previous years before I was an entrepreneur, I worked in the health insurance industry I was a licensed agent, but I worked for a company in town where we had the contracts with the local one of the local hospitals. So therefore we had a certain amount of doctors in our network, and then we had our hospital, And we had negotiated discounts with the large employers such as Notre Dame, St. Mary's, AM General. And those types of companies are very, very aware of their medical insurance claims because they're self-insured and they're funding all of it. And it's the same for the cities that you are working for. They're self-insured.
Right.
So they are way more interested in helping the health of their people. It's the middle group, the 2 to 500 employee sizes that are fully insured, meaning they just pay into a bucket of money for these insurance rates. And a lot of people don't really know, they just don't know. So wellness programs are usually better with a fully insured program, a larger company, because they have more skin in the game.
Right.
So that's good. I mean, I really honor what you're doing.
That's a great insight on your part. Very few people are aware of that. Like, part of the reason why we had the success that we did here in Reno is that it was a self-insured captive. And so they really, the numbers are real, like they're looking at, oh man, we've got this much coming in and this much going out, and we're going to have a serious problem here. And it was a little bit interesting in that we had kind of a paramilitary operation, the police and fire departments, where there was a fair amount of cultural pressure put on people to comply with the program. And that's part of the challenge that we found since then, is that, in free living people who bounce from job to job every 2 to 3 years or what have you, the insurer, which in certain cases can be the employer because they do a self-insured captive, or, if they're part of like a Blue Cross Blue Shield or what have you. But there's this detachment from the reality of paying for this process. And, all of us are familiar with paying for apples and oranges and tomatoes and cars, but this medical system has become this really oblique process, and nobody really cares or really appreciates how it all plays out. It's really funny that in plastic surgery circles, this is all very straightforward. It's cash and carry. Everybody advertises what the costs are and stuff like that. Innovation tends to be very, very rapid. There's lots of competition, but there's some real reticence to look at that very market-driven element that's in, say, like elective surgeries, and then try to pull some of that in on the mainstream medicine. But we probably brought the listenership down to like 4 people even talking about that. So I apologize.
You know what, though? It's so true. I mean, I know that there's a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to my show. And, for me, I have a very small business. My insurance is stupid. It's just stupid. And my deductible is so high. And I look at it because one of my things that I was super passionate about when I was in that industry was I wanted so badly, because I was already a health and fitness nut just in my own, as my own thing that I would do for myself. I wanted so badly to just put together an on-site wellness team, and I had this big vision to just be able to go into these places and help the employees get moving and educate them, because education is everything. What they don't know, they don't know. And once they start to get a handle on things, then they become more interested in it. But it is just, education is everything. And I remember looking at that and thinking, okay, because we had both. We had fully insured and self-insured programs. And the fully insured people, they just, like you just said, they just kind of like did not think about it. They just really did not. And so therefore, when you're not thinking about it, it's just not in your brain. It's not in your sphere of what you're looking at. And when you can just start to educate them and help them, then even then, those for the fully insured, those rates do go down. It's the same for the self-insured. And what I found, though, when I did this, because we did have more freedom with our self-insured programs for the wellness programs, is that there was still limitations on what we could enforce, what we had the power to enforce because of that freedom aspect. It's like an HR thing. Like, you can only say so much. You can only force people to do so much is basically what I'm trying to get at.
Right.
And I was like, no, it should be 100% requirement. everybody should have to do it, but it was an opt-in kind of a thing. Which,
and it's interesting. Like, there was just some legislation passed in Nevada specific to police officers, and if the police officer is consuming tobacco products and they don't rectify that, then when the individual retires, they will no longer be eligible for insurance compensation for cardiovascular disease issues. And it's pretty interesting. And, I'm pretty libertarian at heart. So I like a lot of, market-based incentives and whatnot. But it is interesting that the costs are getting such that people are starting to mandate, okay, you can't be a smoker. Or if you are, we're just not going to pay for your stuff. Mm-hmm. And then the question kind of arises, well, what are you going to do in that case? But, I think that there's opportunity there. The nervousness that I have, though, is that, like, the government says, okay, everybody, instead of making it outcome based, figure out a way to reduce your cardiovascular disease risk or your BMI or whatever, and leave that pretty agnostic. I'm nervous that they're going to come in and say, okay, everybody needs to be high carb, low fat vegan, which is what would kill me. It may work for other people, but it absolutely does not work for me. So it'll be interesting. There will be some chickens coming home to roost in this story in probably the next 10 to 15 years.
For sure. And I'm absolutely looking forward to seeing that, because in my mind, I think that companies and self-insured programs have every right in the world to demand that kind of stuff, to say, look, if you smoke, we're not paying for it, period.
Right.
But if you're trying your best to be healthy and there's, things outside of your control, we'll help you. But, it's just like, you can only do so much. And when there are people out there who are just really, truly ignoring or just don't care, then why should you care?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm excited to see what comes of it. I know that there's so many new things that have happened since I left that industry, and that was back in 2010. So that's quite a while ago. But, I'm sure that people are interested to know how your newest book differs from, the Paleo Solution. So why don't you give us a little insight as to what you're doing? What is your new book, first off, and tell us how that differs from the Paleo Solution.
Sure. Yeah. When I finished my first book, this shows you what a knucklehead I am. Like, when we pressed play to send it to the publisher, I was like, okay, I need to figure out what else to do. Like, there's nothing left to say in nutrition. It's all done. And, I need to go farm coconuts or something, and it was really successful. It had really great reach, but there is kind of a reality that there's always more to learn. There's always more to do. And the Paleo Solution really did start from this perspective of, hey, look at our hunter-gatherer ancestors. They were pretty healthy despite, no real Western medical, interventions, and maybe there's something to be learned from that. And it's a good message in many ways, but there's oftentimes some very powerful knee-jerk responses to that whole story. And another problem with that whole paleo diet concept is that people spent a lot of time asking, is this food paleo, instead of saying, is this actually good for me? Which are really a more crucial question. And there was another observation that I had, that lots and lots of people would start on the 21-day sugar detox that you mentioned, or Whole30, or like one of my paleo challenges or something like that. They would motor along and they're doing great. And then they would just kind of come unraveled. And in talking to them and poking around a little bit, I would get this sense from these people. They would say something to this effect. They'd say, I didn't know it was going to be this hard. I just don't know if I'm up to it. If only I was a better person, then this would be easier. And I noodled on that a lot. And in the back of my head, I'm like, no, this isn't supposed to be easy. Like, we live in a world that is set up completely at odds with the way that our genetics are really wired. Like, in a natural living environment, we are genetically wired to eat more and move less. Like, if we all went out and lived in a survival show as kind of hunter-gatherers with stone tools and what have you, we would have to be really careful about what we did, because it's very hard to get enough food particularly without burning more calories than what you get. And this is called optimum foraging strategy, and it plays into the neuroregulation of appetite, which is what Wired to Eat is really all about on the beginning of the book. If we can understand why we are driven to eat all the food, everything that's not nailed down, and to, quote, be lazy, what does laziness mean in a survival context? It means you're not burning that really vital key energy that you might need for doing something else. This is the way that we're born into the world, our genetics kind of expecting us to experience, but we experience a world that we can order food to our door. It can be an infinite variety of flavors and textures. We have super titillating, social media, Netflix, 1,000 channels of cable TV to distract us. So we have a world that is set up in a way that really plays against our tendency to eat more and move less. And the only advice that we get from the gatekeepers, from the medical establishment, is everything in moderation, which I don't know what moderation means. When you walk down the snack aisle of a supermarket, what does moderation even mean? I mean, if I'm not all that into sweet stuff, but you get me a bag of what is it, the sea salt and vinegar potato chips? I would kill someone to eat that whole bag, So what does moderation even mean in that context? It's ridiculous. And the recommendation to just eat a little less and move a little more is ridiculous, because it is like telling the person who is holding their breath underwater and they are just about ready to pass out and potentially drown and die, hey, just hold your breath a little longer. Like, you are just fighting basic human biology when you tell people to eat less and move more. And so what you've got to do, you've got to construct our sleep, our food, our movement, our community in ways so that the neuroregulation of appetite works for us, so that when we eat enough, that's enough, and we don't eat too much, and we're not eating too little, and things kind of play out in a good position. The magic is really figuring out a way that people can eat satisfying, nutritious, enjoyable meals, but when they're done, and they're not back in raiding the refrigerator or the freezer or the pantry. And part of that is just, really good planning, but that's really the shtick with Wired to Eat. It's talking about all of the neuroregulation of appetite, how we're wired to eat in this particular way, and to not really seek out physical activity. And that if you understand that, then hopefully it diffuses all of the guilt and the morality and the sense of shame that oftentimes goes with trying to change our diet and lifestyle. Like, if you find that stuff difficult, that is 100% okay. That is totally reasonable. And if we understand that, then hopefully we can diffuse the emotionality around it. Now we have a decision to make. Are we going to do something about it? But if we can at least get people to a spot where they are not beating themselves up and feeling like failures before they even start, then what I've found is people have a much higher likelihood of success.
Wow. I love that. When you said that about going moderation, a couple things is, first of all, take your child down the sweets aisle and say, okay, just pick a balanced array. It's like, no. Not even. I have this rule with my son. I'm like, no. He ordered a Sprite once, I think, at lunch when I took him out. My son actually had a hiatus where he lived with his dad for 4 years, and so he totally out of my control food-wise. And I was paleo, and he went to a home that was not. And so when I went out I took him out, and he ordered a Sprite. I was like, what? What did you just order? No, he'll have whole milk. That's what I said to the lady. And he was like, okay. But I also don't have any sort of hesitation in doing that at all, because I am mom. And as long as he's mine until he's 18, he's going to at least learn what is 100% in my mind the right thing to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and one of the other things, is I think that solution is where doctors started to say, move more and just eat more balanced, was their, and I have empathy for them, was their lazy response to people's, because they have to fight it too. You know, even the,
right.
like us, they have to fight it all of the time. And they know. And my doctor, he knows, he works out and he eats healthy and he deals with people day in and day out who fight him and buck the system just like what you and I do, what we come across. So I just had that moment where I thought, that's probably just I have an empathetic
it's
moment
almost it's a self-defense mode in some ways, which to your point is should be easy to empathize with. I guess the one bone of contention that I have there is we've made these recommendations for 50 going on 60 years, and they've really epically failed. And at some point, it's like our iPhones are cheaper and faster every time that we turn around. Like there's this thing called Moore's Law. Like every time you turn around, technology gets cheaper and faster, cheaper and better, good. And these we know more about biochemistry and physiology and pathology and genetics than we've ever known in history. In 2013 alone, there were 30,000 peer-reviewed papers on the topic of type 2 diabetes. We know more about this stuff than we ever have, but yet the rates of all this are increasing exponentially. And so we're clearly doing something wrong. And, like doctors and healthcare providers have a big challenge. They have people like my parents rolling into them and saying, hey, man, I just want a pill. I want a magic solution. But there's a lot of people, too, that, if they said, hey, so let me think this through. Let me think back to my first year medical school biochemistry a little bit and physiology. You don't process glucose all that well. Let's reduce the amount of glucose you put in your body and see what happens. And inevitably, people get healthier, and they spontaneously reduce caloric intake because they're super high to super low blood sugar levels aren't disrupting the neuroregulation of appetite. They eat to satiety. They feel good. Maybe once a week they kick their heels up and have a little something that's a bit off rails, but it's not anything crazy. But it's kind of crazy talk to suggest stuff like that within most of mainstream medicine, particularly the dietetic scene. And I will put a caveat in that. It is changing. We have people all the time that are adopting more of this paleo ancestral health kind of approach, that functional medicine. So it really is changing, but we still at an institutional level, like we will have changed the whole world. And then the medical schools will be like, oh yeah, by the way, here, we're going to do this. Like everybody will already be doing it before we really get a change at an institutional level. So that's the one kind of, your point about empathy is very, very well made. And maybe this is just my cranky, curmudgeonly self coming through. But there's still part of me that is not okay with folks forgetting all their first year biochemistry and not thinking this stuff through. And just on a clinical level, like, does it ever finish out well when you start putting people on blood pressure meds and then blood sugar meds and then statins? Like, do they end up heading in a good place? No. It's a consistent downward spiral. It's at best, slowing down the inevitable. And so if you hear some stories about, wow, this type 2 diabetic mom, she went low carb. Now she's no longer type 2 diabetic. She's off her insulin. She lost 50 pounds. Man, maybe you should be a little curious about that. Like, again, that's my crazy, greasy used car salesman suggestion.
No, and I wholly agree with you. And, my statement of being empathetic is just I'm empathizing with them to the degree that I know that they have to fight it just like we do. But you're right. There's a process of what is right. And I have to say this because last night at my yoga studio, we had an event and it was a hormones 101. Because there's so many people just don't have a clue the importance of hormones and what they're doing in the body, and their sickness or their lack of sleep or waking up at 3 a.m. could have everything to do with their hormones, and people just don't know what they don't know. And I was sitting there, and the lady who came in, she deals with biomedical. Is that the right word? Biomedical hormones replacement.
Oh, bioidentical. Yeah,
bioidentical. Yeah. And so that's her main thing, and that's what she's paid for. And so she didn't know my background in nutrition science and exercise science and writing my book. And she learned in that first 15 minutes when she got there, she's like, oh, I didn't know you wrote a book. And so, she started talking about the hormone replacement therapy. And, Rob, sitting there and watching, I was like, oh my gosh, it's just almost like people are so almost hypnotized by just give me what I can do right now. Just give me the vitamin I can buy, or just give me this. And there is we have this lazy aspect to our lives. And if you really, at a couple points in time, I had to say, I am a big believer in, having a full nutritional program that works for people, that's full, real, whole foods, and also an exercise program, and sleep is important, all on top of, before you ever do any sort of replacement therapy. All of that stuff needs to be done. And she agreed with me. And I know that at the same time, people just kind of wanted, okay, well, I'm just going to come in and get my quick fix.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. It's hard on both fronts. It's hard for them because I know that they have to just do what the patient wants in a lot of cases. But I wholly agree with you and agree with your cranky side that there is, I would say it's an ethical thing. You just got to do what's right, all in all.
Right.
From the ground up. And I'm actually excited to be in the environment that we're in, because you especially are at the forefront of a huge movement. And what you did with the city of Reno, it's going to have a tremendous effect, a tremendous domino effect. I have absolutely no doubt that it will.
Thank you, and it's my thought that it will eventually also, but all the incentives kind of need to get rejiggered and realigned so that we're dealing with a bit more reality. But you and I definitely, anybody that walks through our door, that person already made a decision that they probably want to do something for their health, look better, feel better, perform better, what have you. Showing up at your doctor is a little bit like showing up at your mechanic in general. Like, you didn't want to be there, you wanted to do anything besides show up there. And so the medical profession definitely, they have a very difficult job. Even something that you had mentioned, on the one hand, doctors, I think I was making the point, they need to tell people the truth and stuff like that. But then interestingly, because of the transparency that we have, there are all kinds of websites online to review doctors and healthcare providers, which on the one hand is really good. But if that doctor doesn't, dance the way that the patients want him or her to dance, then they get a super bad review, and then that may really negatively impact their overall practice. And so they may be trying to draw that line in the sand and really do good by people, and it will piss somebody off who really just wants their quick fix. And then that could negatively impact that person's livelihood for years, potentially decades to follow.
Right. Oh, you're so
it's,
right.
Man, it just makes me really glad I didn't go to med school. I shed a silent tear when I hear people. They're like, "Yeah, I'm a fourth year medical student." They're still pretty bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I'm just like, "Good luck with that, man." Go into emergency medicine. That's the one area that you'll always be able to have some benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh yeah, we're swimming upstream with that one. But
we definitely have job security. Yeah, nobody's going to come solve this problem right out from under us, and we're like, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah, definitely. So you've mentioned a couple times this neuroregulation of appetite. For the people who are listening who have no idea what that really truly means, can you go into that?
Yeah. So this is the best analogy that I've come up with this, and there's probably better analogies, but I'm not that bright, so this is the best I've been able to do, is when you take your car to the fueling station, usually we show up to fill up our car with gas because the gas gauge is starting to get low, and maybe even a light comes on, and the gas in your car is analogous to the total energy you have in your body, like the stored carbohydrate, the stored fat. And then the gas pump is kind of analogous to our brain, which is sensing, how much energy that we need to put in. And if that system of our car getting fueled up works properly, there's a feedback mechanism that as your gas tank starts to get full, the gas pump senses that. Once it hits a certain point, it turns the gas pump off, and we're good. But if that doesn't work, then the gas pump could keep pushing gas into your car, and eventually it overflows, and we have all kinds of problems. And so our neuroregulation of appetite, like if you ask somebody, like, where do you get your sense of hunger? Where does that exist? And people will say, my belly. Like, I feel hunger in my belly. And that's true. You have the sensation in your belly, but all of our sensorial experience happens in our brain. So it's actually, hormones and nervous interaction from the body interfacing with the brain and the brain interfacing with the body that we get those senses. And when we eat to a certain point, either satiety or beyond, that is largely driven by the neurotransmitters and the hormones that are released both in anticipation of the food and in response to the food. So like we release insulin typically in response to carbohydrate and protein, and that helps us to store that energy. It helps us to partition it in particular ways, which is all good, but it also has different effects on our sense of appetite, like whether we are full or not. And someone who is insulin sensitive, who generally is lean and they respond well to carbohydrates, insulin actually is what they call an anorexic. It means that you are not hungry. It actually, makes you feel full. It makes the sense of hunger go away. But someone who is insulin resistant, when they're on these blood sugar highs and lows and they come off of a big carb meal and they crash and their blood sugar is very low, those changes in blood sugar and that inability to really sense insulin properly, in addition to a bunch of other neurotransmitters, that can just make you feel hungry all the time. And the overflow is when we start gaining excess body weight. We still are hungry, but some people may be 200, 300, 400 pounds overweight. They have tons of energy. They don't need to eat for a year, but they are still hungry all the time because they've kind of broken that neuroregulation of appetite. And so if we can eat in a way that kind of reestablishes that neuroregulation of appetite, do some sleep that supports that, have good community so that our stress levels are kind of properly managed, then all of that, the many kind of complex factors that govern the neuroregulation of appetite all get dealt with at the same time.
Mm-hmm. It's just the magic of the way that the body works. I mean, the body is so intuitive.
It really is. And, it's insanely, incredibly complex. And this is part of the challenge with the conventional approach to most of medicine. Most of medicine is incredibly effective at dealing with infectious disease and trauma. Like if you get hit by a bus, they can do things to keep you alive that are just amazing. It's really jaw-dropping stuff. But again, if you look at chronic degenerative disease, it's very unimpressive what modern medical interventions can provide you. But part of this is because these complex disease processes do not lend themselves to a simple one drug like magic bullet solution, but they are really amenable to these kind of macro interventions of better sleep, better food, handling stress better. Those things end up having really profound, complex effects, but they're rather simple to implement. Go to bed a little earlier, wear some blue blockers before you go to bed. Make sure to have a good whack of protein with every meal because it's highly satiating. Like those things really have powerful effects that don't require a lot of micromanaging to get the benefits. Right.
I have to say this because this is some of this is exactly what I do with. I love science. I love it. And I also love the spiritual metaphysical stuff of instantaneous healing. And, these spiritual books that I read, one of them in particular is the life of the Masters of the Far East, life and teaching of the Masters of the Far East. It talks about our cells and how each cell has infinite spark of the divine within it, and that healing can occur when you bring your mind, state your consciousness to that and marry that together, and then it spreads. And, in my mind, I look at that, I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely, no doubt. Whereas some other people are like, oh no way. And, there is a neurobiology, the neurons that fire together stay together. And that's what feeds your cells. And that's what continues to reproduce until you change your thought system and you change your environment. We know, you and I know, that we are a product of our environment. We're the product of our genes can be changed based on our genetic expression can be changed based on the foods we eat, the environment we live in, the thoughts that we think. So that's just, I wanted to kind of throw that in to what you were saying. I think.
Yeah, and I don't personally have much of a spiritual practice, but to the degree that I do, it's in this kind of chaos mathematics, fractals, like self-similarity at all levels. And there is something for me that is kind of spiritual and divine about that. So I fully agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to kind of circle back to your book, Wired to Eat. You talk about, I want to get into that so the listeners can, really, I want them to pick it up. I want them to read this. I think this is a great book. You talk about personalized nutrition and what that is and why it's important. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I think you would agree with this. We always face a challenge of how do we take someone who isn't spending all day on the internet, and God bless them for not doing that, reading about nutrition, like they just live their life and they do other things besides fixating on their food. But then if they have a health concern or they want to lose some weight or improve their performance, and nutrition looks like a place that they need to start, it's a challenge to start off with a story that's simple enough so that the person can start implementing it, but not so simple that it doesn't actually address their individual needs. And so there's kind of a give and take with that. And so I like to start things with kind of a whole food, paleo leaning type approach to just generally get most people moving in the right direction. But then I really recommend some individualized experimentation, particularly around what amounts and types of carbohydrates people do best with. And so that's the personalized nutrition piece of looking at how do you respond to particular foods, both in a subjective fashion, like, how do you feel between meals? What's your, do you have good cognition? Do you get really hungry or foggy headed between meals? And then in a really objective way, ideally by tracking blood glucose levels after a meal. Mm-hmm. And so in the book, I start folks off with a 30-day reset, which is basically kind of a lower carb paleo approach. And we dial the carbs in based off of a pretty nice triage process that I have in the book for determining where you are on the insulin resistant, insulin sensitivity spectrum. People who are more insulin resistant will tend to probably start on the lower carb side of things. People that are more insulin sensitive might start on the somewhat higher carb, a little bit lower fat side of things. And then we motor them forward for 30 days. Hopefully that process reduces inflammation, helps reestablish the robust neuroregulation of appetite. And then we do a 7-day carb test where we pull some carbs, both that we might consider good and potentially not so good. And we test these folks, and ideally what you do it at breakfast. You take a certain amount of the carbs, which I detail how to figure out how much to do, and two hours later you check your blood glucose and also record your subjective measures. And what we're able to do with that is have a very precise sense of what foods you do best with and also the amounts that you do quite well with. So like for myself, white rice and white potatoes, if I eat a pretty average portion of these carbohydrate foods, my blood sugar gets up near diabetic levels. I mean, it goes crazy. And historically, I've known that on kind of a intuitive level. I'd eat these foods and then I would feel really foggy headed. I'd have this big crash afterwards. but I had never specifically tracked the blood glucose. But I just did a 2-week experiment where I wore a continuous blood glucose meter, and it checked my blood sugar once a minute. And so I was able to do some real-time tracking of where my blood glucose went. And so white rice, white potatoes, really not that good of a fit for me. If I'm going to have those, I need to have a very small portion. But then the same amount of carbohydrate from lentils or corn, I really had a very modest blood glucose response. And so, and again, just on an intuitive level, I've always noticed, I'm like, if I have some corn tortillas, that's really not that big of a deal for me, particularly if it's like post-workout or something like that. But something like white rice or white potatoes, I just generally didn't feel all that good.
Wow, that's great. It's almost kind of like doing this could be almost like a big, huge market research for you.
Well, the idea that I had for this approach is actually based off some research that was done in Israel about 1.5 to 2 years ago now. It was published, but they did a huge study where they had 800 people that they put a continuous blood glucose monitor on them. They did a full genetic profile on these people. They did a gut microbiome profile. And then they started feeding these folks different meals and tracking their blood glucose over time. And what they found was really interesting. There was just no consistency within the story. Some people responded fantastically to carbs that you would think would be really problematic, like white bread or white rice or something like that. And then other people would eat something like hummus. And even though I'm like the paleo guy, like hummus is like protein and fat. Like there's hardly any carbs in it. But those people got certain people got a very large blood glucose response from hummus. And part of what's going on there is that certain foods, we have an immunogenic response, like with celiac or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. If people have an immune response to a particular food, whether it's wheat or eggs or peanuts or what have you, we tend to release cortisol, the stress hormone, and that tends to drive up blood glucose. So it's really interesting that you can eat a food that would generally be regarded as pretty low carb, like hummus, and you can get a pretty profound blood glucose response just because immunogenically, like from a immune system response perspective, that food isn't a good fit for you. And so we get a stress response that drives the blood glucose up.
Holy
so
smokes.
So that research was really powerful in maybe providing some insight into the idea that, we really can't do one size fits all recommendations, which is good to have that awareness. But again, the challenge there is how do you just get people started without bombing them out with all the details?
Oh my gosh, right? Because that's huge.
Right.
That is so, I'm like sitting here going, I want my hands on that. I want to see that. I want to know more about that because stress is so big. And, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about, we can have the process and we can say, okay, this is your 30-day thing. This is what you're going to do. This is when we're going to test you. Want your blood markers now, before and after. And also for those of you that can test during, great. I think just having those parameters is great benchmarks along the way to keep somebody on track. But we are humans and we get stressed. And what I have found in my life and with the research that I've done on stress is that stress is our trigger to a bad response, to taking us out of what we wanted to do, and the automatic mode gets kicked on. And so we go for that thing that's that quick fix to make us feel better instantly. And it's not what we wanted. So we'll have the cookie because it's there in that moment of weakness, or we'll have a drink, and sometimes it's even consciously, but afterwards you go, oh man, shouldn't have done that.
Right.
You
desperately wish for a do-over, but you don't necessarily get it. Yeah.
There are so many parameters with this whole nutritional paradigm and also human behavior. But the one good thing that my mind is telling me to say right now is that the body, as long as you're doing most of the things right and you're going in that right direction, the body can be self-regulating. So those little slip-ups aren't going to completely derail you in most cases,
Yeah, without a doubt, and that's one of the important features to keep in mind. And it's one of the most common excuses that people give for bailing on a quote diet or, new way of eating. They have one meal that's off the rails and they're like, oh, I screwed it up. It's all for naught. And then they just bail on the whole thing. And it's like, no. You're one meal away from being right back in the fight, and look back at the last 2 weeks. Like you've had 42 meals that were totally on point. And so now your 43rd meal is maybe not ideal, but does that matter? Like, does it matter at all? Or do you just want to get super emotional and turn this into like some sort of a moral failing? And, so that's where I take a pretty dim view of this concept of like cheating on food. You can't cheat on food. You can cheat on relationships. You can cheat on taxes. But food, there's consequences. That's it. It's alpha, omega, done. And you just have to understand that there's consequences to food. For me, I am so horrifically reactive to gluten that there's literally like you could wrap the hottest Playboy bunny in like a bed of dough and there's no reason for me to eat to the middle of it because it's going to be so bad for me. There's literally no inducement that is practically worthwhile for me with that. So I just don't do gluten. Like there's not a cake, there's not a tort, there's nothing that there's not a gluten-free alternative that I'm totally down for. Now the one thing, there is no gluten-free beer that I find particularly appealing, and I did love beer in the past, but it's kind of tequila is a decent second place. But for me, I've just really kind of mapped out what is and isn't acceptable for me, and gluten exposure is unacceptable. The results are just not worth any of the like momentary bliss that I might have with it. And that's going to be different from person to person, but you just understand that. And that's not a moral story. That's a like, I hit my head, coming through a doorway. Do I raise the doorway? Do I stoop down? Like I figure out some way to adapt to this so that I don't experience the pain again,
Yeah. So because you had ulcerative colitis, what are some of the things that happened to you? I mean, is it just absolute digestive uproar?
Digestive uproar, whatever bathroom I find after that exposure needs a priest and an exorcism and should be bricked over and never used again. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty dramatic. And I'm the canary in the coal mine such that, like, if it's just cross-contamination, like if they grill some French bread on a grill and then grill a steak on the grill a day later, I get sick from that.
Wow.
So that's the degree of sensitivity that I have, which is awesome, particularly because I travel a decent amount, which has kind of just made me embrace intermittent fasting and stuff like that sometimes. It's like I would just rather not eat than potentially get poisoned. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. That is, I'm not that sensitive to it, thank God, but and sometimes I think about that and I go, I don't know. I'm glad I'm not, but that also gives me more freedom. It gives me a little bit more leeway. I'm more apt to just go, oh, it doesn't hurt me, so therefore I'm okay. But I know the truth behind that it could very well be harming me in ways that I don't even know. So that's why I'm super interested in the research behind, how foods elicit a stress response. That's incredible.
Right.
Just continuing to do our research and learning is the most important thing for all of us, and really understanding our own body. So that seems to be what your book is really about. It's almost kind of like it's a program. And how long is the program? How does the paleo or primal lifestyle fit into it? Give us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So, I try to set some context with the front part of the book, talking about the neuroregulation of appetite, our digestion, inflammation, sleep, movement, community. Like I try to pull all that together about what, how do we understand our current situation? And now here's a program that we're going to use to tackle it. And the 30-day reset is basically built around paleo foods. And again, there's kind of a process of figuring out where you are on the insulin resistance, insulin sensitivity spectrum, and that will kind of change a little bit of which path you take on that 30-day reset. After the 30-day reset, then I recommend doing some really dedicated testing around the carbohydrates that you want to play with to see the amounts and types that you do best with. And then from there, it's kind of writing into the sunset. Like we need to figure out some middle ground between, kicking our heels up and having fun, but also keeping more meals than not kind of within some better parameters. And so I throw out some somewhat loose recommendations of, maybe 2 meals a week or a little bit more, you have more latitude with them and whatnot. But, with the caveat there that these meals cannot be the equivalent of like a Tijuana hookers and cocaine binge.
Yeah.
Like, if that process spins you out so badly that you don't come back for 2 months, then we maybe don't get to do that. And again, it's not a morality thing. Like there are certain people who are alcoholics who can have a drink. They just can't have 2 drinks. There's some people who are alcoholics who can't use herbal tinctures unless it's in glycerin instead of alcohol, because of the response that they have. And that's all an individual process. And you just kind of have to discover that and then honor it for what it is. But that's the basic shtick. We try to understand our situation, and then that way we can get the logical part of our brain talking with the emotional part of our brain about like, hey, it's okay. This is hard. It's understandable, but you don't need to freak out about it. You can totally do it. We tackle this in an incremental fashion. Having 1 meal off the rails is not failure. It's not cheating. It's just we have some consequences. And like for me, the consequence of gluten is really bad. For you, it's pretty modest. And so we can use that as feedback to figure out what we want to do as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I am just super excited for your book and what the potential that it has. I think that, for me, I am a huge avid person for psychology. I love psychology, and I also love science and nutrition science, and I am an emotional person. I'm all of these things, they seem to be like, this is what your book is really all about. It's just kind of like a big collage of bringing all of this together in a way that is scientific, but also honoring the psychology and the neurobiology and neuroscience of our brains and how we process things, how we can become addicted to things. And it seems to me that that's what your book is really here to help with, which is just incredible. I'm in love with this idea. Yeah.
My publishers were not in love with how big and rangy it is. It's almost a 400-page book with, I think we have like 85 recipes in it and whatnot. So it's a big book, and they wanted basically like 7 days to paleo abs. And I said, I'm not really that guy. Like you picked the wrong person if that's the book you want. So
sure.
Yeah.
I could help them with that part. It's so funny. Like I could do those little quick things, but I love the science, and I love this psychological aspect of this, because this is a bigger scale. This is what we're really truly dealing with. It's not just this cookie cutter approach that is easy. That is 7-day abs. Like, sure, we can do that. We can give that quick little thing that people want and give them access to that and give them that little nugget because they want it. That's their piece of chocolate, and then also that's also a gateway and a doorway to this bigger program, this bigger process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited. I think that this is great. Where can people find you? Where can they get their hands on this book?
So my main haunt on the interwebs is robbwolf.com, 2 B's in the Rob. You can get the links to my Twitter and Instagram and Facebook accounts. I'm pretty active on social media. The book is officially going to be released on March 21st. It's available for pre-order everywhere books are sold. And if you do end up ordering it ahead of time, definitely check out robbwolf.com, because we have a ton of bonus material for the folks that do the pre-orders. Like basically you'll take a copy of your receipt, send it to an email that gets reviewed, and then you get a workbook that helps you basically, all the material in the main Wired to Eat text. It basically walks you through that, and in particular walks you through the 30-day reset. I have an interview with Dr. William Cromwell. He's the head of cardiovascular disease research at Liposcience and LabCorp. And I really go deep on the blood testing that I recommend in the book. So he provides a really amazing perspective on that. And there's like 2 other super cool things, which I cannot for the life of me remember what they are. But there's a bunch of swag there, basically, for the folks that do pre-order the book.
Well, I'm definitely going to pre-order this book. I'm excited for it. There's so many more things that we could talk about today, and I don't really know how much more you want to share, but I know that you have, even in the book, do you talk about ketosis and fasting in the book?
I do a chapter on ketosis and fasting. It's a completely separate treatment, and I'm a huge fan of ketosis and fasting. That was actually kind of my first exposure to the, kind of ancestral eating.
Yeah.
But I have a caveat on that. I'm this funny guy that absolutely loves ketosis and fasting, but I also see it as being a very powerful tool, and a tool that's not always appropriate for all people at all times.
Yeah.
And that gets me into hot water. Like, the people who really like low carb diets think that because I don't think that it's appropriate for every single person all the time, they think that I don't like the low carb diets. And then the people who hate low carb diets think that I'm a moron because I recommend low carb at all. So it's kind of funny, like the 2 ends of the spectrum end up not really getting what I'm trying to say and pretty much hating me in the process. So that's kind of funny.
Oh, wow. I get it though, because I fast a lot, actually. I've found that it works really well for me, and I love it. I love the way, actually, I had my tonsils taken out in this past summer in 2016 in June. And at 38 years old, it was the worst thing I've ever done in my life. And I had to fast for, about 3 weeks. Couldn't really get any food in my body. And after that, food did not taste good. So fasting became something that I just started to do, and my body completely changed. And I actually dove into learning more about it. And it is kind of one of those things that, like you said earlier, 7 days to 6-pack, it's kind of one of those things that can be an easy, quick solution. But there are people who maybe it's not the best for. And
right. I've seen a lot of these like CrossFit Games hopefuls, like they do 7 workouts a week, and they do hot yoga to relax, and they've eaten 6 grams of carbs in 2 months, and those are the people that are willing to intermittent fast 22 hours a day. And so it's already that type A person that is over the top, that they just don't need more. Like, fasting to some degree is a stress, and they're already maxed out. So that's where I really hold those things as very powerful tools, but you want to use them at the right place at the right time.
And you talk about that in the book?
Absolutely, yes.
Oh,
yeah.
good.
At length, yeah.
Awesome. Very good. So is there anything else that you'd like to share today that we haven't touched upon?
I think we did a pretty good treatment of all that stuff. Just hugely honored to be on your show and finally connected with you a bit.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been so good, and I'm so excited for this book, the potential that it has, and for everything that you're doing. So I just want to thank you for the work that you do in this community, and also, I can't wait to see you at Paleo FX this year.
That'll be great. Bring your jiu-jitsu gi and we'll do a little rolling.
I've never done jiu-jitsu.
Bring it. I'll bring you an extra gi, and I'll show you how to get out of mount.
Okay. Yes.
Somebody sitting on top of you. I'll show you how to get them off of you. Yeah.
I need to know that, actually.
Yeah, it's basic self-defense deal. Yeah.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's such a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Liz. Take care.
You too. All right, guys. I hope you loved this show with Rob as much as I did. So after today's show, I had an idea to really just put something out into the world. And it was all about the abs thing, because I've actually been wanting to create something to help people really understand how to even get abs to begin with, how to reveal them. And, sometimes I think people have the wrong idea of how it works. And I have been kind of sitting on this for a while now. I was going to do a 21-day jumpstart to abs, and then how to get them. And then I just decided that I was going to do this little quick free video series, just talking about the real truths behind how you get them, how do you reveal them, what to do, and just get the basics. Because if you start doing that, then you're going to at least start moving in that direction. And going from having a gut or a lot of belly fat to having a six-pack is not an easy task. And some people don't even think that they are going to be able to ever get there. And I'm here to tell you, yes, you can, as long as you just follow what works consistently. It will work for you. There's no reason it shouldn't. As long as your health is good, and we can work on that. That's what we do. Both Rob and I in this show, this is what we do. We help to fix your health. No matter if you have diabetes, PCOS, fibromyalgia, all of that stuff can be fixed via nutrition. And if you are in that boat, you absolutely cannot afford to wait anymore. You just can't. You can't afford to wait. So head to my website and sign up for the newsletter, because in the next week and a half, I'm going to be releasing a launch for a quick ab series, and I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to call it yet. My son wants me to call it the Figure Fit Sexy Six Pack, and I'm thinking maybe he'll win. So it is just the really fundamental things that you need to do, and also a couple of really key, easy tips that can help you get there faster when you have built them, when you're eating right, and just little tips that I have that have really helped me along the way. So head to liznierzwicki.com, sign up for my newsletter if you're not already on there. And in the next week and a half, 2 weeks, I will be sending out the invite to invite you in, and it is going to be absolutely free. It's just going to be a video series, okay? So that is all, you guys. I hope you loved today's show, and thank you so much for your time and for your ears. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye. Thank you guys so much for spending your time with me today on the Figure Fit Lifestyle Coaching Podcast. I am incredibly grateful that you stopped by. If you could take just 1 second to share this episode with someone you think would love it and who can use it, I would be so incredibly grateful and honored, and I know that your friends will thank you too. Also, if you feel so moved, we would be incredibly grateful if you could go into iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Leave us an honest thought, an honest comment. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you love. Tell us what you need more of. It would really help us out on our journey to help thousands and thousands of people reconnect back to their soul, live a life of health and happiness, and to love the body that they are in. Until then, don't forget that you are so worth your own self-love, self-care, and investment in your body, your goals, and your life. Thank you so much for tuning in today, everybody. Have a great day.